The Arctic wind howled around the sturdy frame of the icebreaker ship as it cut through the frozen expanse, sending plumes of snow swirling in its wake. The ship, a hulking behemoth of steel and technology, seemed almost insignificant against the vast, unending whiteness that stretched to the horizon in every direction. Aboard, the team of seasoned explorers was gathered in the ship's heated cabin, poring over maps and historical documents. Dr. Samuel Harding, the expedition leader, was a seasoned archaeologist with a passion for solving historical mysteries. He stood at the head of the table, his gray eyes scanning the faces of his team. Dr. Laura Mitchell, a geologist with a knack for deciphering ancient symbols, sat next to him, her brow furrowed in concentration as she read through an old leather-bound journal. Dr. Mark Turner, a biologist known for his expertise in Arctic wildlife, was busy organizing their equipment. Robert Bob Jenkins, the most experienced explorer among them, was pacing back and forth, his eyes occasionally glancing out the window at the icy landscape. "We're getting close," Dr. Harding announced, tapping a spot on the map. This is where the last known coordinates of the lost expedition were recorded. If the stories are true, we should find their remains somewhere in this area. The lost expedition had always fascinated Dr. Harding. It was a tale of bravery and tragedy, a group of explorers who had ventured into the Arctic over a century ago and vanished without a trace. They had left behind tantalizing clues, fragments of letters, sketches, and cryptic journal entries that hinted at something extraordinary buried beneath the ice. As the ship approached the designated coordinates, the anticipation among the team grew palpable. The Arctic sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows over the pristine snow. The landscape was a study in contrasts, blindingly white during the day and plunged into inky darkness at night. The silence was profound, broken only by the occasional creak and groan of the icebreaker as it forged ahead. Finally, the ship came to a halt, anchored in a stretch of ice thick enough to support their weight. The team donned their heavy parkas, gloves, and goggles and stepped out into the biting cold. The wind cut through them like a knife, but their excitement kept them warm. They began to unload their equipment: ice picks, thermal scanners, and ground-penetrating radar. Bob took the lead, using the radar to scan the area for any anomalies beneath the ice. The rest of the team followed, their breath visible in the frigid air. After several hours of searching, Bob's scanner beeped, indicating a large mass buried deep below the surface. They gathered around, peering at the screen. "This looks promising," Bob said, his voice muffled by his scarf. "We've got something big down there." The team set to work, using their ice picks and drills to penetrate the thick layers of ice. The work was arduous, and the cold sapped their strength, but they pressed on, driven by the hope of uncovering the lost expedition. As they dug deeper, they began to find artifacts, rusted tools, pieces of torn clothing, and finally the remnants of a makeshift campsite. The sight was eerie, as if time had stood still for over a century. The campsite was a snapshot of a moment in history, frozen in the ice. Dr. Mitchell examined the area, noting the peculiar patterns in the ice. It looked as though something had disturbed it recently, but she couldn't quite put her finger on what. As night fell, they set up their own camp nearby, their tents huddled together against the cold. Inside the main tent, they gathered around a small heater, sharing their discoveries and speculations. Dr. Turner examined the bones they had found, his brow furrowed in concentration. "These marks, they're strange," he said, holding up a bone. "They look like bite marks, but I can't identify the creature responsible. It's unlike anything I've seen before." The mood grew somber as they pondered the implications. Dr. Harding, feeling a sense of responsibility for his team, tried to keep their spirits up. "We've made incredible progress today," he said. "Tomorrow we'll dig deeper and see what else we can find. We're close to uncovering the truth." Just as they were about to call it a night, Bob entered the tent holding something unusual, an old leather-bound journal encased in a block of ice. The sight of it sent a shiver down Dr. Harding's spine. He carefully thawed the journal using the heater, and as the ice melted away, he opened the cover. The pages were remarkably well preserved, filled with handwritten entries. Dr. Harding began to read aloud, his voice trembling slightly. The early entries were mundane, detailing the daily struggles of the expedition, frozen equipment, dwindling supplies, and harsh weather conditions. But as he read further, the tone of the journal changed. The entries grew more frantic, filled with descriptions of strange occurrences. Shadows moving in the night, eerie whispers carried by the wind, an unseen terror stalking us relentlessly, Dr. Harding read, his voice dropping to a whisper. The final entry was a chilling warning. "We are not alone in the ice. Beware what lurks beneath." The team sat in stunned silence, the weight of the words hanging in the air. Outside, the wind howled, and the temperature continued to drop. Dr. Mitchell glanced nervously at the tent flap, convinced she heard something moving outside. Dr. Turner shifted uneasily, his earlier confidence shaken. Dr. Harding closed the journal, his face pale. "We need to be careful," he said, his voice barely audible. "Whatever happened to them, we might be facing the same danger." The team nodded in agreement, their excitement now tempered with fear. They knew that the Arctic was a place of many secrets, and they had just begun to uncover one of its darkest. The next morning, the Arctic storm had passed, leaving behind a clear, cold day with a crystalline blue sky. The team emerged from their tents, bundled tightly against the biting wind, and resumed their excavation. The eerie journal entries from the previous night hung heavily in their minds, but their determination to uncover the truth drove them forward. Bob Jenkins led the way, using the thermal scanner to locate the largest mass beneath the ice. It wasn't long before the scanner beeped, indicating something substantial just a few feet below. Dr. Samuel Harding, Dr. Laura Mitchell, and Dr. Mark Turner joined him, and together they began to dig. Their ice picks and shovels chipped away at the frozen layers, each strike echoing in the stillness. After hours of laborious digging, they finally broke through to a wooden crate, its surface weathered but intact. With a mix of excitement and trepidation, they pried it open. Inside, they found a collection of scientific instruments, rusted but still recognizable. There were old-fashioned thermometers, barometers, and other equipment that must have been cutting edge in its time. Dr. Mitchell carefully cataloged each item, her gloved hands trembling slightly with excitement. "This equipment, it must have been incredibly valuable to them," Dr. Mitchell said, her breath fogging in the frigid air. "They were definitely onto something significant." Nearby, Dr. Turner and Bob continued to dig, uncovering more artifacts. They found torn clothing, scattered tools, and finally, the skeletal remains of a human body. The sight was both tragic and fascinating. Dr. Turner knelt beside the bones, examining them closely. These marks, they're definitely bite marks, but I can't identify the creature responsible, he said, his voice tinged with frustration. It's like nothing I've seen in the Arctic. As they dug deeper, they uncovered more bones, all bearing the same strange marks. The evidence pointed to a violent end for the lost expedition, but the nature of the threat remained a mystery. The deeper they went, the more the feeling of unease grew. Dr. Harding, overseeing the excavation, felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. His mind kept returning to the journal's final entries, the desperate warnings of an unseen terror. He knew they had to find more clues to understand what had happened and why. Let's keep digging, Dr. Harding urged. There's more here. We need to find out what they were searching for. Their persistence paid off. Not long after, Dr. Mitchell uncovered another crate, this one larger and more heavily reinforced. It was partially buried in the ice, and it took all of them to haul it up to the surface. They pried it open, revealing a trove of notebooks, maps, and other documents. Dr. Harding carefully examined the notebooks, flipping through pages filled with detailed observations and sketches. One map in particular caught his eye. It was covered in annotations and symbols, marking a specific area not far from their current location. The map suggested that the lost expedition had been searching for something specific, something they believed to be of great importance. This map, it looks like they were looking for something here, Dr. Harding said, showing it to the others. They believed it was significant enough to risk everything. Dr. Mitchell, studying the map, noticed that some of the symbols matched those in the journal and on the carved stone they had found. These symbols, they look ancient, she said, tracing them with her finger. We need to decipher these. They might give us a clue about what they were after. The team's curiosity and determination were now mingled with a growing sense of dread. The more they uncovered, the more they realized the magnitude of what they had stumbled upon. The lost expedition had been on the brink of a major discovery, but something had stopped them. Something deadly. As they continued to work, Bob's thermal scanner detected another anomaly beneath the ice, not far from where they had found the crates. They dug carefully, revealing a large frozen body, remarkably well preserved by the ice. The sight was both shocking and heartbreaking. The body of a man, his face frozen in an expression of sheer terror. Dr. Turner examined the body, noting the same unusual marks on the bones. Whatever did this, it's still out there, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. The body was clutching something in its frozen hands, an intricately carved stone, similar to the one they had found before. Dr. Harding took the stone, feeling its cold, smooth surface. It was covered in the same strange symbols. We need to figure out what these symbols mean, Dr. Harding said, his mind racing. They might be the key to understanding what happened here. As they documented their findings, the temperature seemed to drop further. The wind picked up, carrying with it the same eerie whispers described in the journal. The feeling of being watched grew stronger, and Dr. Mitchell couldn't shake the sensation that something was moving just beyond their field of vision. We should head back to camp, Bob suggested, glancing nervously at the darkening sky. We can study the symbols and try to make sense of this. The team agreed, packing up their discoveries and making their way back to their tents. The whispers seemed to follow them, growing louder with each step. As they huddled together in the main tent, the sense of unease was palpable. That night, as they worked to decipher the symbols, the wind howled outside and the temperature continued to drop. Dr. Harding and Dr. Mitchell focused on the carved stones, trying to make sense of the ancient script. The more they delved into it, the more they felt they were unlocking something that should have remained buried. As they worked, the whispers seemed to grow louder, echoing in the vast emptiness of the Arctic. The sense of being watched was overwhelming, and they knew that whatever had killed the lost expedition was still out there, lurking in the ice, waiting for its next victim. The team awoke to a whiteout blizzard, the wind howling ferociously around their tent. Visibility was near zero, and the temperature had plummeted even further. The oppressive cold seemed to seep into their bones, amplifying their already heightened sense of dread. Trapped by the storm, they decided to spend the day analyzing the artifacts and trying to decipher the journal and the stone. Inside the relative warmth of their main tent, the atmosphere was tense. Dr. Samuel Harding and Dr. Laura Mitchell huddled over the ancient carved stone and the journal, their faces illuminated by the soft glow of a lantern. Dr. Mark Turner organized their equipment while Bob Jenkins kept an eye on the storm, his expression grim. Dr. Harding carefully examined the journal entries again, this time focusing on the symbols that matched those on the stone. Dr. Mitchell, with her background in ancient languages, worked alongside him. They made slow progress, but it became clear that the symbols were part of an ancient script, possibly a warning or an incantation. "I think these symbols are a kind of protective charm," Dr. Mitchell said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The lost expedition must have found something they were trying to contain or control." Dr. Harding nodded, his brow furrowed in concentration. "It makes sense. The journal mentioned shadows and whispers, something unnatural. They must have been desperate to find a way to stop it." Meanwhile, Bob and Dr. Turner inspected the body they had found. The preservation was astounding, and the expression of terror on the frozen face was haunting. Dr. Turner's examination revealed more bite marks, similar to those on the other bones, but still he couldn't identify the creature responsible. "This doesn't make any sense," Dr. Turner muttered, his frustration evident. "No known Arctic predator makes marks like these. It's like something out of a nightmare." Bob, however, was more concerned with the eerie feeling that they were not alone. He kept glancing at the tent flap, convinced that shadows were moving outside. The wind carried faint, almost human-like whispers that sent chills down his spine. As night fell, the storm showed no signs of abating. The team decided to take turns keeping watch. During Bob's shift, he heard faint scratching sounds coming from outside the tent. He shook it off as the wind, but the sounds grew louder, more deliberate. Summoning his courage, he peeked outside, only to see nothing but swirling snow. Returning inside, he was certain he had seen shapes moving in the distance, shapes that resembled the figures described in the journal. Just as he was about to wake the others, a sudden, bone-chilling scream pierced the night. The team scrambled to their feet, grabbing their flashlights and weapons. Stepping outside, they saw what appeared to be shadows darting between the ice mounds, too fast and fluid to be human. The whispers grew louder, and the air was filled with an oppressive sense of malevolence. "What the hell is that?" Bob shouted over the howling wind, his flashlight beam sweeping across the frozen landscape. "I don't know, but we need to stick together," Dr. Harding replied, gripping his rifle tightly. "Whatever it is, it's not friendly." The team retreated to the safety of their main tent, the sense of dread now overwhelming. They knew that they had awakened something ancient and dangerous. The journal's warnings echoed in their minds, and they realized that they were facing the same terror that had doomed the lost expedition. Dr. Mitchell, her hands shaking, continued to study the carved stone. "We need to finish deciphering this," she said urgently. "If it's a protective charm, it might be our only chance." Dr. Harding nodded, his mind racing. "We have to figure this out. We can't let whatever this is get to us." As they worked, the whispers grew louder, and the shadows outside seemed to press closer. The storm raged on, and the temperature continued to drop. The tent's thin walls offered little protection against the encroaching darkness. Hours passed, and the team's exhaustion was palpable. But just as they were beginning to lose hope, Dr. Mitchell made a breakthrough. "I think I've got it," she said, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and excitement. "The symbols, they form a ritual, a binding spell meant to contain the entity." Dr. Harding's eyes widened. "We need to perform the ritual. It's our only hope." Gathering their resolve, the team prepared for the ritual. They arranged the artifacts they had found in a circle, placing the carved stones at the center. Dr. Harding and Dr. Mitchell began to chant the ancient words, their voices rising above the howling wind. The ground beneath them rumbled ominously, and the air grew colder. The shadows outside the tent seemed to converge, drawn by the disturbance. The team's fear was palpable, but they continued the ritual, hoping it would protect them. As they reached the final incantation, the ground cracked open, revealing a chasm of icy darkness. From the depths emerged the source of their terror, a monstrous entity made of ice and shadow, its form constantly shifting and flowing. It was an ancient guardian, awakened by their intrusion. The creature's presence was overwhelming, its eyes glowing with a cold, malevolent intelligence. It moved towards them with an unnatural grace, and the team realized that the ritual was incomplete. The stone in Dr. Harding's hand began to glow, and he understood that he had to sacrifice himself to seal the creature away. In a moment of bravery, Dr. Harding stepped forward, chanting the final words of the incantation. The stone absorbed his life force, creating a blinding light that enveloped the creature. The other team members watched in horror and awe as Dr. Harding and the entity were both consumed by the light, which then imploded, sealing the chasm and restoring silence to the Arctic. The storm began to dissipate, and the oppressive atmosphere lifted. The remaining team members, Dr. Mitchell, Dr. Turner, and Bob, stood in stunned silence, mourning their leader's sacrifice. They knew they had to leave the cursed site and warn others of the danger that lay beneath the ice. As they made their way back to the ship, the whispers of the Arctic seemed to follow them, a haunting reminder of the terror they had faced. The legend of the lost expedition would now include their own tale, a warning to future explorers about the ancient evil that still lurked beneath the frozen surface. The icebreaker ship made its slow journey back through the Arctic waters, the frigid silence outside contrasting sharply with the tense atmosphere inside the cabin. Dr. Laura Mitchell, Dr. Mark Turner, and Bob Jenkins sat around the table, their faces drawn with exhaustion and grief. The loss of Dr. Samuel Harding weighed heavily on them, but they knew they had to keep moving. As the ship cut through the icy waters, Dr. Mitchell pored over the remaining journals and notes, trying to piece together the full story of the lost expedition. She felt a deep responsibility to document everything, both for the memory of Dr. Harding and to ensure that future explorers would be forewarned. "We need to make sure this never happens again," she said, her voice trembling. "We have to get this information to the right people." Dr. Turner nodded, his face grim. "The world needs to know what's out there, this place. It's not just dangerous, it's a living nightmare." Bob, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, finally spoke up. "We can't just tell people. We need proof, something tangible that shows the world what we've seen." They agreed to compile their findings into a comprehensive report, including the artifacts they had retrieved and the detailed journal entries. Dr. Mitchell meticulously organized the notes, while Dr. Turner prepared the samples and evidence they had collected. As the days passed, the ship made steady progress, and the team gradually began to feel a sense of relief. They were leaving behind the horrors of the Arctic, but the memories remained vivid and haunting. Every night, the whispers seemed to follow them, creeping into their dreams and reminding them of the entity that still lurked beneath the ice. One evening, as they were nearing the end of their journey, Dr. Mitchell stumbled upon a final chilling entry in the Lost Expedition's journal. It was written in a shaky hand, the ink smudged as if the writer had been in a state of panic. "We have sealed it away, but the cost was great. It will remain dormant as long as no one disturbs it. We must leave this place and never return. The darkness within the ice is beyond comprehension. It is eternal, and it is watching." The entry confirmed their worst fears. The entity was still there, waiting. The team knew they had narrowly escaped with their lives, and the knowledge that the horror was still out there added an additional layer of dread to their thoughts. As the ship docked at the nearest port, the team was greeted by a small group of officials and scientists eager to hear about their expedition. The trio disembarked, carrying their boxes of artifacts and reports. They were escorted to a secure facility where they could present their findings. Inside a sterile, brightly lit conference room, Dr. Mitchell began the presentation. She detailed their discovery of the Lost Expedition's remains, the strange symbols, and the terrifying encounter with the entity. Dr. Turner supported her with biological evidence, showing the peculiar bite marks and the preserved body. Bob provided a detailed account of their final moments in the Arctic, including the ritual and Dr. Harding's sacrifice. The officials listened intently, their faces growing more serious as the story unfolded. They examined the artifacts and journal entries with a mix of fascination and horror. When Dr. Mitchell concluded, there was a heavy silence in the room. One of the officials, a senior scientist with a stern expression, finally spoke. "This is extraordinary, but we need to verify your findings. We'll need to send another team to confirm the presence of this entity." "No!" Dr. Mitchell exclaimed, her voice shaking. "You can't send anyone else out there. We barely made it out alive. If you disturb it again, there's no telling what will happen." Dr. Turner and Bob nodded in agreement, their faces pale. "It's too dangerous," Dr. Turner added. "We were lucky to survive. You need to take our warning seriously." The officials exchanged worried glances. The room fell silent again, the weight of the decision pressing down on them. They knew that verifying the findings was crucial, but the risk was immense. "We'll take your warnings into account," the senior scientist said slowly. "But we have to conduct further research. For now, we'll classify this information and restrict access to the site. Thank you for your bravery and your dedication." With heavy hearts, the team handed over their findings, knowing they had done all they could to warn the world. As they left the facility, a sense of unease settled over them. They had escaped the Arctic, but they couldn't shake the feeling that they were still being watched. Back in their respective homes, life slowly began to return to normal. Dr. Mitchell resumed her work at the university, Dr. Turner continued his research, and Bob returned to his exploration endeavors. But the memories of the Arctic haunted them all. Every time the wind howled or a shadow moved, they were reminded of the entity that lurked beneath the ice. One night, months after their return, Dr. Mitchell received a package in the mail. It was unmarked, with no return address. Inside, she found a single ancient stone, covered in the same eerie symbols they had discovered in the Arctic. A chill ran down her spine as she realized what it meant. She immediately called Dr. Turner and Bob, her voice trembling. "It's not over. Someone knows. Someone has found the stones." The trio knew they had to act. The entity was still out there, and its secrets had been disturbed once more. They couldn't let the same horror be unleashed upon the world again. Determined to protect humanity, they made a pact to monitor any activity related to the Arctic and to safeguard the knowledge they had uncovered. They had faced the darkness and survived, but they knew that the true test was yet to come. As they hung up the phone, each of them felt the weight of their responsibility. The Arctic's dark secret was still out there, waiting. And they were the guardians of a warning that could mean the difference between life and unimaginable terror. In the quiet of her home, Dr. Mitchell placed the stone in a secure box, locking it away. The whispers in the wind seemed to echo her thoughts, a constant reminder of the entity that watched from beneath the ice. The haunting aftermath of their expedition would stay with them forever, a shadow over their lives and a chilling reminder of the terror that lay waiting in the frozen depths.